Tyla and Douglas Gabriel with you today. If you look in the description box, you're going to see a PDF of a book that we have made available for free for anybody. And it's a book that Douglas has written. It's called The Eternal Ethers, A Theory of Everything. What's so exciting about this is that we're beginning to see more and more articles and videos that are addressing the topic of the ethers. Now, you get the book, you can read all the details, but what we're going to begin to do is something that we have done with more other of our books, where we read a section and then we ask Douglas to begin to expound on this extemporaneously.
Well, Tyler, this is beautiful. I'm so glad that you've sparked a new interest in this and that you've asked me to speak on this.
Well, the ethers are a very important subject, and it is in the realm of creativity and a becomingness that we need to move on into. We've all been beat up a lot with the geopolitics, but it doesn't have to end that way. The world that stands before us is so incredible, but we need to understand the forces that the science that we learn in school doesn't take us. So let's get started, and we're going to start with the introduction. The spiritual scientist knows what scientists of the material world do not. The physical body is interpenetrated by currents of energy that bring it life and rejuvenation each day. This body of energy is not completely physical and is in general composed of forces that are invisible to the five common senses of sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. These forces come from the life body or etheric body of the human that holds the answers to these questions, and perhaps may be the very book of seven seals that is referred to in the book of Revelation.
Wow, I forget how good some of this stuff is.
Yeah. Well, we worked really hard on this book. It took about a year. Of course, it took your whole lifetime to be able to digest the many books that I see on your bookshelf about the ethers, because people have been talking about the ethers for a long, long time. But we wanted to have a book that you could go to and trust the source.
Yes, and we had to reveal this because it's the central proposition of Waldorf education. It's the central proposition of spiritual development, individuals' personal spiritual development. And if you are studying anything to do with what you might call magic or what makes the world work, if you are one of those people who want to know how the world works, you need to study the ethers. Because in that paragraph is really congealed exactly what needs to be understood. The ethers, and we'll talk about how many they are and all that in a minute. But the ethers are behind everything. Without the luminiferous ether that Einstein presupposed, the theory of relativity couldn't exist. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that this ether has to be there for his theories to work. Even the recent discovery of the attempt to take a picture of a black hole, that wasn't taken with optics. That was taken with sound. That was taken with receiving EMF frequency. So, and then constructing an image of it. So when we're talking about the ethers, you're talking about what no one can actually see. You cannot see warmth. Now you might see it as fire, but warmth is basically the interaction between every single atom in the world, and it interchanges. It's basically the theory of thermodynamics. If you want, so there's four ethers that generally we talk about, and if you want, that you can't see warmth, you can't see light, you can't see sound, and you can't see life. You can see the effects of them. And so for people who want to study the physical world, we have a physical body, an etheric body, which I like to call the life body sometimes because it makes more sense to people, a body of desires, which in esotericism it's called the astral body. Everybody knows their body of desire. I never have a problem getting people to see the fact that they have a body of desire inside of them that nobody can see. It's invisible, and yet it drives them. That's your astral body. And then you have an ego, an I am, a presence of your individuality, basically a singularity. And that ego can develop and become like the cosmos, or it can not develop and become like a rock if you want, or an animal down to a plant to a rock. So if you want, you can devolve your ego, but you're supposed to be evolving it. And if you're going to evolve your ego, this thing that rides on top of the physical life body, body of desires, this ego, this I am, this self. In the first 28 years, you're supposed to be developing that self, and then after that, you can be selfless. But the point is, you need to know what your bodies are. The only thing we know in science, or the only thing that what we would call secular humanist science, what they actually know is what is called the body of entropy, the physical body, the body that's dying. That's all they can seem to get a handle on, is watching things die, and they kill them, they burn them, they destroy them, and as they do, they watch it, and that's all we have. How about the body of life? How about the body that helps you stand up? Where does that come from? Where does levity come from? Why do trees grow up? What's the relationship to the sun? That's light. So warmth and light expand up and out, and their levity, and we don't even talk about them. They barely exist in science. There's a science of entropy, but there's no science of ectropy, which is the science of levity.
Well, science is limited in what is perceived because it only uses the 5 senses that provide quantitative, measurable data. The challenge with quantum physics is that it defies the 5 senses and coaxes the materialistic scientist into a realm closer to religion and magic than science. Imagine a scientist studying light. Can he really learn all there is to know about light with physical instrumentation? How much more would she know if he could eliminate or could examine light with senses and tools not bound by the limitations of physical science?
Great passage to read, because now we know that light can go faster than the speed of light, as long as it's in a laser or in certain conditions. We also know that observing the speed of light, actually, because we are observing it, we changed the speed of light. When they looked at the black hole, all they saw was exactly what they had, through hundreds of thousands of simulations, predicted they would see. In other words, they did the math ahead of time, and then they tuned the machine to produce exactly what they wanted, a picture of a black hole.
And since you brought that up, Douglas, explain to people that you don't actually see that image that you're looking at the internet. That's not exactly what you see.
The first question that they asked these scientists when they said they have a picture was, even these were just journalists, they said, you can't take a picture with the type of radio telescope that you were using. That's not an optic image. And then they all laughed and said, that's true. It's a computer reconstructed image of what we have gathered through putting an array of electromagnetic frequency collectors, antennas, so big that it made basically a dish, more or less, to receive, as big as the Earth. And so when they got that big, then they thought they gathered enough information. But it's just like when they found the G ring on Saturn, which is the last rings on Saturn of this material rotating around Saturn. It is actually 3 bands that are interwoven in absolutely coherent rope kind of configuration, which basically takes all theory of gravity and throws it away. And then when they found recently that they thought they could see light falling into a black hole, they could actually discover gravity. So they thought they finally discovered this mysterious force of gravity that Einstein speaks of. And now they think, because of a shadow from the outer event horizon of this supermassive black hole, that they gathered basically frequency emanations. That's all it is. It's the same thing as like picking up a radio frequency and then listening to it. So really, that was a sound. It was a sound they heard that they turned into a picture. And this is critical because this has everything to do with the sound ether and then the life ether, because the life ether is actually gravity. And sound ether is the interaction of every atom. It's also called the ether of number, of valence, the ether of sound ether. There's many names for that particular ether. So those 4 ethers: warmth, light, sound, and life. When you look at any manifestation in the universe, in the cosmos, or in the human being, and they are one and the same. The human body has everything that's in the cosmos, except for one thing, which I won't go into. But let's just say there's a perfect replica. We have a 3D holographic representation in ourself as a singularity of basically what we can see as the entire cosmos. And what we think we see is not what we see at all, because we're using limited earthbound senses to try to go beyond the earth. That doesn't work. It doesn't even get you through the atmosphere. And it doesn't get you to even perceive the true motion of the earth. Right now we found out the true motion of the earth. Finally, we had computers big enough to take what we see and not as a human come up with the answer, but as a machine. And the machine shows us that we are, exactly as Rudolf Steiner predicted, a set of 3 different planets being pulled behind the sun. The sun goes in front of us and clears the cosmos for us, and then we travel behind it, or else we wouldn't be able to exist. And there's literally, what Steiner didn't call them gravity ropes, but there's literally these ropes that connect the sun to each of these planets. And when you see the motion, it looks like DNA. If you see it as a live motion or moving it quickly, it looks just like DNA. So what I'm saying is the warmth, light, sound, and life in the cosmos is generally completely found in the human body, but we see the reflection of it. We see the earthbound reflection of it. In the 2 higher ethers, sound ether and life ether, we only get to see what has fallen to the earth that has first come through our atmosphere. If we could go out beyond our atmosphere and directly experience the warmth, light, sound, and life of the sun, then we'd be extremely advanced. We'd be at the other end, the future end of our spiritual development.
If you have started listening and you feel like you're totally lost in what we're saying, let me bring it back down to earth and give you an example of what we're talking about when we talk about the ethers. Take an acorn, and we do this contemplation with people and suggest that you just take an acorn and look at that acorn and imagine that in the acorn are these amazing forces that take that acorn and will become the mighty oak tree, that big mighty oak tree. And even more than that, if you took a little cone from a sequoia tree, inside one of the little prickly things, you could dig way down in there and you could get the tiniest little seed. As you know, Douglas, it's such a tiny little seed. And from that seed becomes the mighty sequoia that to this date we haven't seen a sequoia naturally die. That is what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's chemical ether. That valence ether, that is the every chemical or electronic, ionic exchange between any matter and another piece of matter has to do with the chemical ether. It's sound. Is it going to be harmonious or is it not? An ether, let's take an enzyme. An enzyme, basically, because of its form, creates a certain sound. And anytime it comes near other things, it can catalyze them, and yet it doesn't give up of itself. So it just keeps making this sound, and the sound is made from the form. Well, the form is the structure of, well, we could get great detail. Probably shouldn't go there. So as we're looking at the sound ether, yes, it's absolutely, as you say. And when we're looking at exchanges between the planets or our solar systems or our galaxies or a supermassive black hole, which then, like a heartbeat, over a great period of time, as a supermassive black hole, which they have these supposed images of, sucks in everything around it, it can also go to the other extreme where it shoots things out of that same exact area. And so they have in this picture of this black hole a huge, what used to be called an ion jet. Now they're calling it a relativistic jet. It's an ion jet. And it actually kicks out energy. It doesn't just suck it in. It's actually, and it's longer than the entire galaxy that this supermassive black hole is in. So there is an exchange that happens when you have contraction, gravity, and then expansion, levity. The levity is like the ion jet. The contraction, gravity, is like the supermassive black hole. Well, that happens every time your heart beats. Same thing. It's just that we are going through it at a different speed. And there are, out in the galaxies, many of them, all kinds of stages of this going on. So we can see that every single galaxy is individual. It's a singularity, and so is every single human. And though every single human heart is basically tuned to the same frequency that the earth is tuned to, called the Schumann frequency, 7.83 hertz, 7.83 vibrations per second, that's the vibration, that is the frequency that your heart gives off. It's also the frequency of the earth. It's also the frequency of our solar system and of galaxies. So when we talk about the ethers, we're talking about the tiniest forces that can manifest in the small and in the large, no matter how small, no matter how large. So there's a fifth ether that I must tell you about. And then that ether is a very mysterious ether. And then I mentioned the sixth and seventh ether, which are sometimes called the tree of life, because once we are able to experience the sun directly and receive the true sound and life of the sun, then we have the tree of life. We have down here now a bit of understanding of these ethers, and that's called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And we can do good or evil with them. There's a good reason that these forces are invisible, because humans would probably use them and have to turn them into human machinations, and we have gone into that in the book. But what we're trying to show people is that the human etheric body is the key factor to life, to levity, to seeing the shadow of the divine as it manifests in the physical world. You really won't see spirit in the physical world. You will see the ethers. But the ethers are not just that simple. They also work with manifestations of form. So we hear earth, water, air, fire. We also hear that they can be elementary forces, which basically are like what we would call gnomes and sylphs and undines and these kind of beings that arise out of the ethers and the elements. We could also say that they are etheric formative forces. And so they are forces that come in from the cosmos and work and stream through our body, as that first paragraph described. What we would call the energy of chi, the energy of the meridians, as it's called in the East. These lines of energy that run through the body that re-enliven you every day through simple rhythms of sleep and waking. As soon as your sleep and waking is disturbed, your ego is disturbed, your astral body is disturbed, your life body is disturbed. So the simplest of rhythms of how you eat, how you dress, what you allow in your environment, what the rhythm of your day is, whether there's stress in your body. These are all the factors of whether the elementary forces coming in through the etheric formative forces from the cosmos actually build you up or don't. So these forces that are living, that are the levity forces, are outside of you, but they come into you and you use them, but you have to use them properly. Let's say that you have all these forces. It's called grace in religion. You have all these amazing forces streaming at you at all times, but are you so depressed that you can't receive them, and so it messes up your life and your eating and your job and everything else, all relationships? So your astral body just controlled your life body and your physical body. And remember, life body is levity, physical body is gravity. Now, the warmth, light, sound, and life, strangely enough, think about it though. What does warmth do? Expands in all directions. Where's it going? To the cosmos, where it came from. What does light do? Expands in all directions. Where's it going? It actually goes to a limit, stops and comes back, which we're not going to talk about much, but these simple, what could be called elements or ethers, or were called in the ancient times tattvas, and if you study magic of any weight, you'll find that all it is learning to have a relationship with these elemental beings that we're speaking of through the ethers. The ethers are the way that they work. The etheric formative forces are the way they come in. The elements are the very tools that they're using, but it's consciousness that directs it. The whole universe is the thinking of one united being that can acknowledge every singularity in the cosmos. And it has a limit. And it's just like when the sun's light goes out, it goes out to Saturn, and then it turns around and you see a magnetic, what we call sound or life ether. Life ether and sound ether can turn into electromagnetic energy when it's pulled down to the earth. But when it's out there in the cosmos, it's a little bit different. So the warmth, light, sound, and life of the sun go out to the Saturn, and then the sound and life ether turn around and invisibly come back to the sun. Now, that's called the solar breath. This has been proven by science. They can even hear it, because as it reaches, as the solar breath can be strong or weak depending upon what's happening on the surface of the sun, but it can literally be heard at the poles of each of the planets. So you can hear this sound coming from the sun as it enters into the planet. And then the magnetism or gravity that is coming from the sun literally comes in at the poles, and that's what holds the spheres in the spheres of the planets in their axis. So these very simple forces, you might think, are actually cosmic forces. They're one and the same. It couldn't be any way other than that. As above, so below, it said.
Well, let's turn to, again, something more practical and how it applies. And let's look at DNA. And let's look at what happens when we change the DNA. I love this quote here from the book. Wisdom children of all ages know the future destiny of their soul is to become an angel. Before scientists alter the DNA structure of any organism, whether a kernel of corn or a human being, shouldn't we explore a more profound question of whether the interference will irrevocably change the unfolding wisdom that has already been written in the DNA code? This is so important because, people, we are not just who we are right here and now in this moment of time. We are human beings unfolding. We really haven't seen who we really are. Imagine that you're just in a process like that little tiny acorn is in the process of becoming an oak. Where is the human being in the unfoldingness and the unfolding process? And speak about the DNA and the ethers.
Well, you are really going to take us up there. Okay, here we go. What is DNA made of? 4 simple substances. How many ethers are there? 4. What binds them together? Well, that's another substance that is very prevalent. I'm not going to get into all the names of them.
Now, that's okay, because in the link we have a whole package where people can continue to explore this subject.
And I explained it all in great detail in the book. But remember this, there's 4 substances, and they simply have different combinations, and they create a little band. And that band goes across to connect to 2 other bands, and those bands are really magically held together by forms of phosphorus. But the point is it's really, really as simple as those 4 substances and the 4 elements, and literally understanding what oxygen, hydrogen, phosphorus, carbon, the most magical of all the substances. But anyway, what we're talking about is it's replicated in DNA, the very simple thing, which is in all sugars, and we now know that we can find this substance similarly in the cosmos, and it's called galactose. Galactose floats around in clouds of ethanol in the cosmos, and it is almost the exact same substance as mother's milk, in which you look at the DNA. Now, DNA is mostly, a huge part of it is still empty. Why? We are still writing into the DNA our future. Now, what does science look at? They look at the DNA of, what do? They stop replication of specific aspects of DNA. And by doing so, they think they can stop illnesses. But can science write into DNA? They actually have figured out how to do that. But what they write into it is their own, showing that one strand of DNA can hold everything ever written by human beings in all time because of how magnificent, huge capacity the DNA has to have information written into it. Well, we wrote a lot into our DNA. There's 2 types of multiple types of DNA. One type is more male, nucleic, and the other type is more female, mitochondrial. What is mitochondrial? It's an interaction with the outside world to say, can I digest you? Well, that's not only with food, and they can show the strands every time. Well, first off, everyone in who comes, the modern human being is from a simple group, one of three groups in Africa. Now they're even saying just one group, but three groups in Africa. And as they traveled, they ate different things, and their mitochondrial DNA had to adapt, modify, so that they could eat things that they didn't eat in the place they were born. And as they changed, the nucleic DNA also changed, and that's why you see different races, because as they moved throughout the earth, the etheric formative forces also penetrate the earth and then come back up through the earth. And so in the ancient times, when the Greeks studied, they said, if you want to know the mystery of the whole universe, here it is: earth, water, air, fire. That's it. But to them, they could look to the northeast and they could feel what was coming to them etherically, not only tellurically from the ground, but also through the sky. And that's why so many religions had a sky god, because they could literally read the sky, they could read the ethers, they could read the weather being created by warmth, light, sound, and life. And as they did, they interacted with it and they could contact beingness. And when I mentioned before that the people who study magic are trying to basically create an elemental being, whether they call it a homunculus or whether they call it a doppelganger or whether they call it a fire elemental, it doesn't really matter. All they're doing is projecting a part of themselves and looking at themselves in an interaction with an elementary being. But every time you speak, and if you have a real thought in that spoken word, or if you have a real thought yourself, you create an elementary being. We are gods in the becoming, and we create elementary beings. Now, are you going to create good ones? Or are you going to create bad ones? And the big question is, are you going to disenchant the good and the bad ones that are in the material world? Because this is the real mission of the ethers, is to understand that we construct and deconstruct everything in our individual singularity perception of the world. So we're either in heaven or hell, depending upon whether we can properly receive the elementary forces from the earth, the etheric formative forces from the cosmos, and then command them through our astral body into our etheric body.
But when a modern scientist goes in to manipulate a kernel of corn through some GMO process, they're not considering the etheric nature of the corn. And then it begins to change and rewrite the future of that being. And that's the danger.
It's a horrible danger, because we forget that it was Zarathustra, an ancient Persian priest king, who crossbred the majority of what we eat, whether it be plant or animal. And it all started in basically Anatolia, in southern Turkey. And there, Zarathustra, in the ancient Persian culture, crossbred lilies with grasses and created some of our grains. Crossbred wild roses with trees and plants and vines, and created what we have is all the five-petaled, wonderful fruits and everything that's five-petaled. So everything that's six-petaled came from the lily, and the crossbreeding at that time with the lily with grasses and the roses five-petaled with basically everything else. And then that started the grains and the fruits, but then, for instance, pigs and cows and sheep and many other things started to be crossbred at that time and hybrid. And now we're messing with hybrids that have lasted all this time. As they do, they find that hybrids don't last. And what did they find with, as Tyler has pointed out, with genetically modified organisms? They don't last. Not only that, the beings who eat them, they don't last, and they no longer can propagate.
I mean, look at pigs who eat these GMO corns. Their intestines become soup over time, because the organism that they're digesting doesn't digest. It destroys. And one other thing I want you to go into, I want to know what the relationship is to 5G and how it would affect the etheric bodies of all life. Birds, bees, kitties, puppies, animals. I mean, people don't seem to be concerned about the effects on humans, but what about nature?
That's the light ether, sound ether, and life ether all being affected in a negative way, so that you cannot have this self-structuring, self-organizing aspect of the life ether, which is what keeps us all going as a human being, because you're constantly having the chemical ether or these electromagnetic frequency interchanges and exchanges from a microwave level, which literally goes in your body and heats up your organs from the inside out, and that's happening to most Americans because we're sitting right next to a cell tower.
So it's working from the cellular level upwards.
And you won't be able to have true life. What it is that's a sound that's an evil sound of demons. Think of it. The chemical ether is the sound ether. It is destroying the structure, our cellular structure, to be able to have life. It's attacking the outer. It's actually attacking the DNA from our nucleus and from our mitochondrial DNA from the inside out. And that's why people are having trouble having babies. That's why trees and animals, and particularly insects, are dying even from microwave. You add 5G and you're going to make it 100 times worse. So what you're doing is, if you do not have the integrity of all four elements, you must have warmth to have life in terms of human life. Of course, you can have other life without warmth. But so warmth must be there before light can be there, and the warmth and light must be there before the sound ether can actually become healthy. And then before you can have life ether, you have to have warmth, light, and sound in its exact right harmonic interchange and balance. Usually, every atom actually has 7 foci. And that's what we see in the solar system. And that's what we see in everything. There's 7 ethers. There's 7 everything. 7 colors in the rainbow. There's 7 basic areas for the chart of elements. There's 7 notes in the, until you reach the octave in our music, blah, blah, blah. On and on and on. Now, when I say 7 planets, I don't count Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because they came later. They were pulled into our solar system. They are not part of this system of 7, this septenary system. And the ethers are septenary. Now, I didn't explain the 5th ether, which is going to be important. But before that, Betsy, you have many names.
Well, we have a LARP that we play on the American Intelligence Media, but our core work has always been what we're discussing right now.
So, Tyler, what we have is the Akashic ether is there. But before we go to the Akashic ether, which has now been basically discovered by science, why do we want to study the ethers? Not only just to see the life and the levity and why the trees grow up towards the sun and why humans stand up and why we can stand up and why anybody has levity. There'd be nothing alive if there was no levity. So how is it that we can see this? Well, a long time ago they used to tell me, if you want to see the ethers, you have to be a teacher. And the last path of initiation that is left to the people, to us in the Western world, for Western Christian esotericists, is to study the Waldorf education system and become a Waldorf teacher and teach the children from age 7 to 14, because during that time, that is the time that the etheric body is growing the strongest. From age birth to 7, that's the physical body. From 7 to 14, that's the etheric body. From 14 to 21, that's the astral body. From 21 to 28, that's the ego. It doesn't really have a body because it can go to anywhere it wants, the ego. So when we're teaching in Waldorf education 7 through 14, we're supposed to be watching the child's etheric body grow. Well, the etheric body is strengthened by strong rhythm, healthy rhythm, what you would call good ritual, a lot of speech, a lot of movement, a lot of the things that are levity, dance, music, art, light, color, all the things that raise you up from the darkness of the earth. That's what we're teaching for 7 years. And then later we teach something different. And before that we teach something different. But during that time we're working with the child's imagination because they have the ability with their mind to see the true way that things are, which is not connected to sense perception, as you pointed out earlier. So you can either watch a child grow from 7 through 14 and try to study the etheric body as it comes into the child from its head down into its heart, or you can go study plants as they grow, as Tyla has just said with the acorn growing into the oak tree. What more magnificent experience can you have? Because the acorn is a singularity and the full-grown oak tree is the cosmos. And that's who we are. And we, when we realize it in the future, as we add to our DNA and write some very important pages of self-directed freedom and love, accepting the grace and mercy and all the wonderful things flowing into us from the cosmos, we write into our DNA. And that's the part of the DNA that's not been written on, and so everyone has the potential to be whatever they want to be. Not only an angel, but in the future, if there is any DNA, maybe there's angelic DNA, I don't know, but you could use the analogy that you could evolve into an archangel or into a being of time, an archai. Well, the angels generally work with images and imagination, and that's very active in the light ether. Archangels work with sound and speech and nations that have a language, and they have controlled 360-year periods of time as the 7 major archangels rotate through, carrying forth their 7 impulses. And they work through sound. And the time beings, well, they're actually getting beyond anything we can conceive of, but they work with our willpower, which we very little understand. They run our organs, our 7 organs, the 7 chambers of our heart. I know you thought there were 4, but there's 7. 2 are coming in the future, and 1 is this one I'm going to describe in a minute, the akasha. And then there's 7 chambers in the head, the ventricles in the head. I know you're going to tell me there's only 5, but there's really 6, and there's a residual one, a 7th. So they work with the 7, the angels, archangels, and archai. And they're bringing in, of course, they want to bring in the higher ethers, and they want us to consciously understand the lower ethers because we're supposed to become controllers of them. How do you control them? Through your astral body. Because it's very hard to see the etheric realm because it's so active that it overwhelms you. So if you can get through, if your ego can penetrate through the astral body, in other words, if your willpower, your intuition can penetrate through inspiration, which is the realm of the archangels, into the realm of imagination, you can start to see the effects of the ethers and the etheric formative forces and the elementary forces, and then you can literally contact elemental beings. And you can do this by watching a child's body grow or watching plants grow, because that is where the etheric formative forces are the most active. There is no limit to what can be said about this. So study it the way that you wish. The book that has been presented to you for free is a PDF. You can also buy it on Amazon if you want to hold a hard copy in your hand. But the point is as you study it, some of this will be somewhat unfamiliar to you, but I'm trying to point out in this book that from ancient times, clairvoyance and priest kings and priestesses and sibyls and the people who were clairvoyant in the past all described this. We tend to think that the ancients weren't accurate. Now, in this book, I present to you the modern theories. And the most modern theories all have a relationship to ethers in some form. They either they take the word ether and turn it into what they want, or they reference different ethers, or they reference one ether, they build it all on one ether. But the ethers are now becoming the vogue, and the theory of everything is what they need, because the relativistic theories don't work, the quantum theories don't work. So they're trying to find theories that work, so they're trying to write a theory of everything. Well, the theory of everything has been written since the beginning of time, of writing, that is, for Upanishads, the beginning of history. It clearly describes them. It couldn't be any more clearly described in the tattvas of the Hindus. And then into the modern age, Rudolf Steiner describes it, and one of his foremost students, Gunther Wachsmuth, describes it in a book called Etheric Formative Forces, as well as many others, his followers, describe this. But we pulled all of that together and showed you the past, the present, and the future. Showed you all 7 ethers. But the magical ether that we point out in the book and show that that theory is now the number one accepted theory. It's called the 0-point theory. That theory believes that everywhere, even in a vacuum, around every atom, which is made up mostly of space, Remember, atoms, the nucleus and the electrons are tiny. It's the space that they circumscribed that is the atom, right? And we went into that a minute ago. There's actually 7 foci involved, but we're not going to go into that. So, with the atoms around every single atom, which stands as a singularity, it follows the same septenary pattern. But even in a vacuum, every single atom and everything it does, every exchange, which means also, let's break that down, everything you say, everything you do, every action you take, every thought you have, every dream you have, is recorded in the Akashic environment around you. Now, the ancient tattvas say that the Akasha is the mother, and that the 4 ethers are your fingers, and the mother is the thumb, and the thumb can go between each of the fingers, because the fingers are these 4 rowdy boys that she has, and they're always interacting, and she has to she has to be there for every single interaction between warmth, light, sound, and life. Warmth and light are always trying to go out. Sound and life are always trying to go down. She has to stand there and balance them. And that's the balancing act of electrons and neutrons. And so the Akashic is absolutely intangible. It's actually unthinkable. As I'm describing this to you, you're going to say, but wait, you're going to say the void, the 0 point, these theories of vacuums actually holding all of the energy that the universe has, and it records everything, and nothing's ever been forgotten, and no interaction has ever been set aside. They are all part of a system that can be tracked all the way back to the beginning. Yes, that's what scientists say, and they believe that that's true. That's why quantum entanglement works. That's why the observer changes of what is being observed works. All of the theories that we know that work flow into the 0 point theory. And Ervin Laszlo writes books on this, and he's basically pulled the research together, because all these modern scientists, they don't seem to talk to each other. They have pieces of the puzzle, but none of them have a theory of 7 ethers, and none of them have a theory of 5 ethers. They'll have 2 or 3, but they won't have the standard ones. Well, if they're going to say ethers, they ought to just look it up, and they'd see that an ether is a tattva, and then they could study this back to the beginning, where they have such infinite detail in description. They have, I recently saw a video that shows the latest structure. It shows the platonic solid. It shows the color. It shows the planet. It shows the note that are related to each of the ethers. But what it doesn't show is the 7 ethers. And if you don't have the 7 ethers, you don't have the completion of what humans are to become. Now, it's true, we're not prepared for even the next step. If I say to you right now, you're going to become an angel, most of you will think, well, that's crazy. What's an angel? And if you ever saw an angel, you'd think you encountered the divine. But what is an angel? An angel is what you will become in the future. But you have to change your DNA. And in the future, because they now know that the atmosphere is being, of course, collapsed because of so many things launched there, so many satellites, so much destruction, so much environmental damage, so more cosmic radiations coming in, and what is it doing? It is fraying your telomeres on your DNA so that you cannot replicate your DNA properly. But if at the right time you receive, because of your consciousness, that cosmic energy coming in, you're writing new code onto your DNA, and it is not closing off your telomeres because you're smart enough to know to take certain substances and to do certain healthy things, particularly pray, particularly meditate, particularly stop the stress in your life. That's what causes telomere degradation. So we are writing on our DNA, and we are and as the atmosphere is collapsing, that's good for spiritual people. For bad people, the DNA is going to collapse, and they're going to turn into something that is subhuman instead of something that is superhuman.
Well, I know it's a lot to ingest because it's such a huge topic. So we invite you to start reading the book, and then we will begin to start deep diving into some of the chapters with the more advanced concepts.
Study the ethers, and the reason I say they're eternal is because once you understand the ethers, you find out that they're in you, they're directly related to your consciousness, and once you understand them, you become eternal.